Flávio announces Alfredo Gaspar as his running mate in a single-party presidential ticket. Then you ask me, who is Alfredo Gaspar? So, I have a picture of him here, right? Look, Alfredo Gaspar is this guy here. He is a federal lawmaker from Alagoas, and he has already been a public prosecutor. He has already been the head of the Public Prosecutor's Office of Alagoas, and he has also been the Secretary of Public Security of Alagoas. All of this happened during Renan's governments because he was friends with Renan, an ally of both Renan Filho and the elder Renan, Renan Calheiros and so on. But then in 2022, he broke with the Calheiros family because he didn't want to support Lula at all, and the Calheiros family supports Lula. Since he's a hardcore Bolsonaro supporter, he even left the party. He was with the MDB and went to the PL to fully embrace the Bolsonaro supporter identity, right? And now he was chosen, he was he was the rapporteur of the COVID CPI, of the INSS inquiry. He kept running around chasing after Lulinha. He even requested Lulinha's arrest as if there was any reason to arrest Lulinha, right? But anyway, that's exactly why he was chosen as Flávio Bolsonaro's running mate, and you'll understand that in a moment. Look. Flávio's running mate brings protection to allies, support for amnesty, and is under investigation for rape. We're going to talk about this last incident, right? Flávio's running mate acts in the House of Representatives to shield Bolsonaro supporters. For example, he was the rapporteur of the project that was going to revoke Ramagem's mandate because after Ramagem was convicted for attempting a coup d'etat. And do you remember that the House of Representatives voted against stripping Ramagem of his seat? That's right. And who was the architect of that? It was Alfredo Gaspar, to save Ramagem's skin. He's the guy who says that Brazil is living under a judicial dictatorship. He's the guy who says that Bolsonaro is being wronged, that he's a victim. That's Alfredo Gaspar, right? Yeah. So he's part of the Bolsonaro's hardline bloc in the House. That's why he was chosen, actually, as the rapporteur of the INSS CPI. And he's been a long-time supporter of the idea of granting amnesty to the January 8th coup plotters. So he just repeats the same speech, which is the usual rhetoric of Bolsonarism, right? So that's why he was also chosen to be vice. Bolsonaro gave his approval to Flávio's vice in a decision limited to the campaign corps. Read behind the scenes. Did Flávio decide this last night? The night before? At 10 p.m., Flávio was releasing a video supporting Alfredo Gaspar to run for Senate in Alagoas. Yesterday at 10 p.m. Then this morning, the guy becomes the running mate. Suddenly, out of nowhere, right? So that's why there's this idea. The guy became the running mate at the last minute. Like, what's the deal? Everyone rushed. This one was left, let's put him in. So they put Alfredo Gaspar in as the running mate. Who discussed this? Flávio did. Valdemar da Costa Neto. And, of course, Bolsonaro, through the lawyers who are able to reach him, Bolsonaro was consulted and gave his approval because Bolsonaro, he runs the process. Bolsonaro, from house arrest, is running the PL's candidate selection process. And he put up a puppet, who is his son, as a candidate. And now also a puppet for vice, because who even is Alfredo Gaspar? Nobody even knows this guy. He has no national profile, none. He doesn't attract votes. In fact, people got upset. A lot of people in the PL got upset because of this. Because he doesn't attract votes. Will he attract votes from the Northeast? He won't. Alagoas is small and he's only well known there, not in the rest of the Northeast, right? Only in the state, which is very small. He doesn't attract the financial market, which wanted a candidate who would signal a more pro-market government. He also doesn't attract the market, doesn't attract business people, doesn't attract anyone. What Flávio did was a pure ticket. A hardcore Bolsonarist. In other words, Bolsonarism is happy. But Bolsonarism was already voting for him anyway. For Flávio. So nothing changes. Now, for that other voter who needs to be won over, this is Alfredo Gaspar. I'm not sure this will win them over. Probably not, right? The choice of Gaspar as Flávio's running mate targets Lulinha and the Northeast, but impacts the Senate race in Alagoas. Here's why. So, you know what happens? Let's go step by step. First, Lulinha. Since he was the rapporteur of the INSS Parliamentary Inquiry Commission, he kept going after Lulinha, asking to access Lulinha's protected records because he wanted to bring Lulinha in to testify, even though there was nothing against him, right? Lulinha's tax and bank records were opened up in court. The Joint Parliamentary Inquiry Commission requested this, and the Supreme Court ordered it. And what happened? The Parliamentary Inquiry Commission leaked this document to the press, so everyone found out about what had happened with Lulinha's bank account. And they found absolutely nothing. No strange deposits, no suspicious transfers in Lulinha's account, just his own money. Even so, you haven't found anything. When the CPI ended, Alfredo Gaspar wrote a report. And in that report, he called for Lulinha's arrest, without having anything against him, but he still called for Lulinha's arrest, and he called for the indictment of more than 200 people. What was the result of that report? It was rejected, obviously, right? He's abusing the powers of his office. It was rejected, so the report wasn't finalized, and the parliamentary inquiry ended without a report. Because what the guy did can't even be called work, right? It was just a witch hunt against Lulinha. To keep Lulinha in the headlines for as long as possible, that's what Flávio's people want to exploit, to keep Lulinha in the news. That's why he chose the rapporteur of the parliamentary inquiry into the INSS, because he's the guy who's going to keep talking about Lulinha all the time. Northeast is what we discussed. The guy's from there, okay? But he doesn't have broad name recognition throughout the entire Northeast. He's only known in Alagoas. And to finish, this impact on the Senate race in Alagoas, it's because here's the thing. Alfredo Gaspar would be a candidate for the Senate, and in Alagoas there's Renan Calheiros, who's also running for the Senate, because his term is ending now and he's trying to get re-elected, right?
Se reeleger.
Arthur Lira no longer wants to be a congressman, he wants to be a senator. Arthur Lira. And there was also Alfredo Gaspar. In Alagoas, he is relatively popular, he was doing well in the polls, and there was a real risk that Arthur Lira wouldn't be able to get elected and would be left out of politics next year. So, in a way, Flávio also, by bringing the guy here and making him a vice presidential candidate, took him out of the Senate race. Thank you. And that opened a path for Arthur Lira to be able to get elected as senator. So, in a way, it also helped Arthur Lira in this situation. That's why it directly interferes in the election in Alagoas, right? But Flávio's running mate has a lot of explaining to do, really a lot of explaining to do. For example, a 6.2 million amendment from Flávio Bolsonaro's running mate disappeared into a city hall account, according to the Federal Court of Accounts. So you think he sent it to a city called São José da Laje in Alagoas? He sent two amendments that totaled 6,200,000 reais PIX Amendments, which are the most problematic kind of amendment there is. PIX Amendment, since the money just goes into City Hall's account, the mayor isn't held accountable and can use it however he wants, without any specific project in mind. And the mayor made off with this money because he transferred it from one account to another, from another account to another, from another account to another, and now there's no way to track the money anymore, and nobody knows how this money was spent. Maria Antonia Pires, thank you for the gift. Thank you too, really, thanks. And then this money disappeared, 6,200,000 reais. Right? And then the Federal Court of Accounts opened an audit to check what happened with this money, and Alfredo Gaspar is one of those being investigated, one of those being audited in this audit to find out what his responsibility is in this case. Because PIX amendments are the secret budget, right? And Alfredo Gaspar lined his pockets with it. That's the word, right? He indulged himself with the PIX amendments, which are the secret budget amendments, and now certainly he'll have to answer for that too. He has said that he did nothing wrong, that he only submitted the amendment, that the responsibility lies with the City Hall, but, you know, the congressman who submits the amendment is responsible for that money. Now that he is effectively the spending authorizer, he sends the money and the government must pay. So he has to be held accountable for that as well. Right, and he'll have to give that explanation. Alfredo Gaspar, Flávio Bolsonaro's running mate, is accused of rape in a case that stalled in the Supreme Federal Court, waiting for a statement from the Attorney General's office. Look, this story started in May, right in the middle of the INSS Inquiry Commission. There was an argument between Alfredo Gaspar and Lindbergh Farias, a congressman from the Workers' Party. And then, during their argument, Lindbergh called Alfredo Gaspar a rapist, said that there's a rape case. Very serious, because here's the thing, that's rape of a vulnerable person, according to Lindbergh's accusation, and he wasn't the only one. No, okay? Soraya Tronic and Rafael Correa. It's not Rafael Correa? Oh my God, I forgot the deputy's name, it slipped my mind, let me see if it's here in the article, yeah. Soraya Tronic and Lindbergh Farias, here there are only two names, but there's a third one, it's Soraya Tronic, who's from Mato Grosso do Sul, also took part in this complaint, and Alfredo Gaspar was like, look, Really pissed off. Furious, right? So much so that he went to court. Look, Gaspar, Flavio's running mate, went to the federal police against Soraya and Lindbergh after being accused of rape. He says the case and what happened with his cousin have nothing to do with him. That he was even planning to take a DNA test. But anyway, in this story, the federal police requested the opening of an investigation, then it goes to the Office of the Prosecutor General, and then there's still no answer from the Office of the Prosecutor General. The Prosecutor General's office should decide whether to open the investigation, but since May, it's been stuck there and nobody does anything. Nobody decides absolutely anything.